All right, let's go to forum.postwrestling.com. We will start off with Johnny. Fine episode of Dynamite tonight. I was excited when the 4-pillar program started because it felt great to see them be elevated to pay-per-view main event status, but the build feels lackluster after the month. My big question of the week is how you feel with Dark and Dark Elevation being done and how it affects AEW. I feel that those shows didn't just help some signed talent get time, but also helped indie talent get some exposure. I know Collision is coming, but will it be a good substitute? I I understand, especially during the pandemic. I thought it was a great service to keep independent talent having dates and to get to make some money during those shows. But I would argue how much it really did to um, elevate a lot of independent talent. And was that your prime focus for Dark and Dark Elevation? Like, to me, it's yes, you're getting ring time for people, but when they're going out there and doing 3-4 minute matches, I didn't know if it was truly serving its purpose in a roundabout way. And yeah, it looks as though Dark and Dark Elevation, if not on pause, are not coming back. It would seem so. Yeah, there were no new episodes this week. Personally, I think there's a lot of AEW programming to keep up with that. There were fans of the shows, but to me, not enough that these updated. When you're adding a 2-hour show, where you find the time and the resources to produce another, like some of these Darks and Dark Elevations were over an hour. I mean, it's just it's a lot of time to dedicate. And you have ROH that can be that function now for you want to get a look at independent talent. That's your outlet for it.
Well, yeah. I think you'll continue to see a lot of maybe that progression. Like it really does turn ROH into sort of like your NXT now. And I think the structure is a little bit cleaner with something that's not necessarily part of the AEW brand, but still provides a way for people to enter AEW, and gives ROH maybe a more specific purpose. I I was not somebody who was watching Dark nor Dark Elevation. So I'm not really upset about this, but there was a dedicated audience that I think would just enjoyed it, and maybe just liked having that extra few hours of wrestling to catch up on a lot of the independent names.
There's a lot of independent wrestling out there.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, these independent names are going to be they're going to have to make a name for themselves on the independents to hopefully get some buzz, so that by the time they finally get in an AEW ring or an ROH ring, it means that much more. Right now, I personally kind of feel like it just kind of waters down like what it means to have an AEW match, So I'm not necessarily upset. In fact, like I think having more A-level shows or even a B-level show, which is what Rampage, or maybe even a C-level show, which is what Rampage is probably going to maybe even turn into that much more of. I think that helps the AEW brand.
With Dark and Dark Elevation being taken off the air to make way for Collision, does addition by subtraction make it easier for the casual viewer to learn about lesser-known talent on the roster? I don't think Dark or Dark Elevation being there makes any difference for trying to find new fans. I don't think new fans are finding the product by those shows themselves. But
it means talents that don't necessarily get booked on Dynamite or Rampage will find their spot as occasional roster members on those two shows and also on AEW Rampage. And beyond that, how much attention does your typical AEW viewer have for everybody on the roster? You get into the point of the conversation where you have to ask, does AEW's roster need to be that big for the amount of first run programming that matters, programming that's drawing them money? Do they need a roster that big?
Yeah. And isolating who your stars are. That's the main thing, is that you can have a roster of 150 people. You're going to have 5 or 6 stars that everything is built around. And that is the key, is that you have those stars. And I'm less concerned about, guys number 80 through 85 as compared to those top 6 and the next 6 that I want to elevate into those top 6 roles.
Right. Yeah. Adrian Smith brings up a good point about people like Amy Sakura that have been exclusively on Dark and what happens to them. And that's a great question. Yeah, like somebody like a Serpentico. I mean, I would expect maybe a lot of them would maybe get shifted to an ROH. But even then, at this point, like some people you're just not going to see as often. But this is it. I don't think running a wrestling promotion should be like sort of like charity. You know, I don't think everybody should have a spot. It's called All Elite Wrestling, and if you're not good enough to be on the main shows or like on your progression towards getting onto the main shows, I don't necessarily feel like there should be a spot for everybody.